So when you first get the Maschine controller, it's going to be in the mode to actually work with Maschine, which makes sense. But the controller is incredibly flexible, and you can actually configure any of the knobs and buttons to send any sort of MIDI data that you like. So in this example, I'm going to be using the massive synthesizer, but using the Maschine controller to control it. And to do that, we'll have to take Maschine out of Maschine mode and into the Midi mode. To do that, it tells you right here, Shift plus Control for Midi. It's just holding the Shift button down and hitting the Control button in the corner. And now we're in Midi mode. This will no longer automatically associate with Maschine, and it will just send MIDI data. To edit what this MIDI it's sending, you'll use the Native Instruments Control Editor program, which can edit the Maschine controller, but also the other Native Instruments controllers. So with the Control Editor program open, you see you have a variety of templates. And when I'm in the Control Editor, I can switch between them just by changing them in the Control Editor. If you don't want to have the Control Editor open all the time, you can hold Shift and use this button to change the templates. You'll see it's changing in the Control Editor, and it's also changing on the controller itself. Now, luckily, there is a massive preset already defined for us, which is the third preset here. And that one will have the macro controls set up to the macro controls in massive by default. And if you hold these, if you click on these two without holding Shift, it'll change what all the macro controls do. For instance, now we see pitch and WT position of the first oscillator. I go further over and we see the second oscillator. And the page information there is kind of telling you what's going on with the macro controls. So these two arrows will change what all the knobs up here do and what the buttons on top do. And then these blue buttons will change what all the pads are doing. And I do like the default massive preset. It does a lot for me, but I wanted to have my pads do something slightly different. So what I did is I edited E here. Now you can go in and edit just the default massive preset, but instead I clicked on the massive preset here in the Control Editor, went to Edit, and just said Duplicate. And that'll make you another version of this template that you can edit without having to mess with that original default. So this one's called Massive Loudon. And I just hold Shift and the right arrow here, and I switch over to Massive Loudon. Now the main thing I did with that is changed what these pads did in the E setting here. So if you look at A, these are going to send kind of a chromatic scale, right up and down. And starting very, very low on the keyboard, you'll see it's C-1 to D#0 as you go up. And in this area here, you'll see it'll tell you exactly what notes are being sent by each pad. In E, I've kind of changed things around. I'm doing a dubstep tune, and I want it to be minor and dark. So instead of using the chromatic scale, I just configured this to be a Phrygian scale, which is a really dark kind of minor scale. And the benefit of that is you're using less notes. So that way I can have basically 2 octaves worth of notes here, and dubstep kind of has these big octave leaps all the time, so that works in my favor. So I have G sharp there, A, B, and C sharp, and then D sharp, E, F sharp, and G sharp. So you'll see I've even changed how the ordering of the notes go. By default, you have C sharp, or C, C sharp, D, D sharp, kind of going across into chromatic scale going up that way. I made the scale go vertically and stay in Phrygian, and these pads just kind of mirror what these pads do up an octave. Now to do that editing, I went over to first to Pages and just chose the E pad here. I could choose D and it would switch here and switch in the Control Editor. I chose E. I can rename it right here just by double clicking, and you can give it a name that you like. And once you're there, you can go to the Assign tab and really redefine what each pad does. So if I click on the first pad here, I can define what note it sends, make sure it's in gate mode so that it goes on and off, and then how the LEDs work. And I like to having it set to, for MIDI out, so every time I hit a note, it lights up, which is kind of nice. So I did the whole thing in 2 octaves. You'll see this is the same as this one. Now it's interesting, this ends up being an octave up, and I want this the same note. So if I click on this one, that pad lights up too, because of the same exact note. So with this kind of setup, I can do quick octave jumps really easily on the pad, which is nice. And these, and then I even have a 2 octave leap right there, which is kind of handy. Now we can configure this differently, and I also like for kind of pads the ability just to hold a note and have it stay. So in the G setting here, I've set these up a little different in that each note I did the chromatic scale like the original ones, but I've set them to mode toggle. So this way, you see they stay on. I'm using a monophonic synth, so it's gliding, but they stay on and turn off. So that might be a way you could kind of play a chord and leave it on, and then turn them off later, which is kind of a neat thing, and that's the toggle mode there. So this is an incredibly configurable device, and I've kind of set up my own template here for this. Now, the one additional configuration I made were these two buttons here, and by default, they're set to be patch changes, or what we call program changes. And they would move up and down on an external synth. And they were set by default to be on channel 1, which usually is fine, but in Logic, channel 1 will always change the channel strip setting. So to be able to get the data too massive, I had to change these over to send on channel 2. So I just went in to hit that button, switch it over to channel 2, and the same on the increment for up, and set that to channel 2. And this will let me change patches on the fly, so I can move through a variety of different dubstep style patches and get a really kind of complex bass sound as I go. And that's all the configuration in the control editor here for the Maschine.